On February 11th, the year 1900, Louis Rhein was born in Kesch, Germany. The proud parents, Jetchen and Karl Rhein.
I went to school 5.5 years at a public school in Kesch, and then I went to the next town, Schwetzingen, where there was a higher school, the so-called Realschule. I went there for 6 more years and graduated with so-called Einjährigen, which means I was entitled to serve only 1 year in the army instead of usually 2 or 3 years.
June 14th, 1914, the assassination of the heir of the Austrian throne brought Germany into World War I. With Russian, English, French, and American help, the German war machine is stopped. Out of this defeat came the Treaty of Versailles. Its terms included the stripping of considerable territory, limitations of the German army, Allied occupation of the left bank of the Rhine River, and reparation payments of 132 billion gold marks to the Allies. The treaty was deeply resented by German nationals and later provided a catalyst for propaganda. Around 1920, young Louis had graduated and left for Mannheim, a town in South Germany.
I went to Mannheim and got a job at a bank as an apprentice. I was an apprentice for 2 years, then I was a regular employee. I stayed there for about 5 years, then I went to Berlin for further education in business. And there I stayed for 1 year, and then I went back to the same company, to the Süddeutsche Bank in Mannheim, and stayed about another 2 years.
At that time, 19-year-old Elsie Stetzenbach, a bookkeeper at the bank, noticed the young man Rhein.
He came quite often to my desk, and I was amazed because usually young men don't do this. And he talked to me and made jokes. He made so many jokes. The whole crew where I was in this department was enthusiastic to join in our laughter. And he began to get closer to me and try to make a date with me. And I said, no way. No way.
She was a bookkeeper, and I was a correspondent. And I liked her from the beginning because she was a very, very friendly and good-looking girl.
Beautiful.
And I figured out a way to get more acquainted to her. I knew she liked opera and classical music, so did I. And I wanted to invite her to go with me to the theater, to the opera. Of course, there was a chance that she said no. And I wanted to avoid it. So I told her,
"Oh, Fräulein Stetzenbach, I can get some tickets for half a price. Wouldn't you like to go with me?" And I said, "If I can pay for it, I like to go with you."
Wait a minute.
And I did pay him the half a price of the ticket, and I had no idea he was sitting beside me. When I got there to the opera, here was sitting Mr. Louis Rhein.
5 years later, Louis Rhein and Elsie Stetzenbach married. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America was rejoicing its victories in the First World War. It was the Roaring '20s. Industrial prosperity fed by the war trickled, then flooded the American economy. But the German economy in the middle '20s was growing weaker due to the Versailles Treaty terms. Reparation payments to the Allies were causing incredible inflation, and it would grow worse. October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. The United States of America's free enterprise system hits bottom, causing major repercussions around the world.
The Depression years followed the terrific inflation Germany had. The inflation destroyed practically every fortune the average people had. My father, for instance, had a very good so-called country store. We were well situated, but my father was an old-fashioned, honest merchant, and he refused to get up the prices when the inflation was so terrific that he never could get the same merchandise at the price he sold the old merchandise. And finally, he was out of money and out of merchandise. When the inflation was over, we had practically nothing left but the house. The merchandise was gone, and the money we had was worthless, absolutely worthless. It was, I believe, 1 billion mark was exchanged then for 1 regular mark, for 1 so-called Rentenmark. Then, of course, the deflation started as a consequence of the inflation. And that was bad insofar as business suffered because of lack of capital. It was very difficult to get a job, but I was lucky. When I left the bank about that time, I got a good job at the plywood factory, Gebrüder Thalheimer. And there I was in the plywood business for about 5 years. And after 5 years, I decided to open my own business in plywood, with Gebrüder Thalheimer as my main supplier.
August 24th, 1930 was a happy day in the lives of Louis and Elsie Rhein. Their first and only child, Edith Laurel, was born.
And I always wanted a daughter. I loved to have a girl. And my husband always wanted a boy. So he didn't like the idea when I had a girl. But she was, and still is, a wonderful, wonderful person. Sweet and kind, considerate, and we love her very dearly. And she loves her daddy very much. And I remember once, when she was about 8 months old, my sister Nina had her in her arms, and my husband left, and on the door, Edith held out her arms and wanted to be taken, and he didn't see it and turned around, and then she started crying so bad because she wanted to go with her daddy. And then, of course, her daddy turned around and took her and then and kissed her, and they both were happy to be together. And Edith, to this day, remembers how she cried because her daddy left and she wanted to go with him. I'm sure she remembers only because I told her so often.
About this time, an Austrian native was gaining political power in Germany. Riding the nationalistic fervor that stemmed from the Treaty of Versailles, Adolf Hitler launched a wave of terrorism aimed at Jews, Catholics, and communists. His goal? To be the leader of the 1,000-year Third Reich.
He never made a secret about his attitude toward the Jews before he went to power. So everybody knew when he will be in power, Jews will have a hard time.
Little by little, Hitler's power grew, first within his own Nazi party, Then, with the masses hypnotized by his fiery speeches calling for the collective support of all good Germans of Aryan descent, his message of hate was soon responsible for the pain, suffering, and deaths of millions.
First, it was hardly impossible to sell anything. My customers got threats from the Nazi party. If they continue to buy from a Jew, they will bear the consequences. So everybody got afraid, and I lost a lot of customers, and I realized I cannot make a living.
On April 1st, 1933, the Nazis started their anti-Semitic policies with a nationwide boycott of Jewish-owned businesses.
No one could sell us any milk or any dairy foods, even though I was young and needed that type of stuff. And if it was discovered that anyone did sell them to us, they were fined. So Mother's neighbors would buy them and then smuggle the milk down to her, and she would pay them then. But things like this were going on, and of course they shielded me. I didn't know about it. I remember Daddy used to call before he came home, and he and Mother had a signal to each other, and if there were men watching the house, if there were Nazis, Gestapo watching the house, then Mother would tell Daddy to bring home some certain food, and he would know not to come home for a while, for a few days. And if the coast was clear, she would tell him some other kind of food, and then he knew it was all right to come home.
The notorious Nuremberg laws were enacted September 15, 1935, reducing all Jews to second-class citizens, prohibiting intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews. However,
Hitler not only was against the Jews, he was against the Catholics also. And many Catholics were tortured and put in concentration camps because they were Catholics. And my father, he was a railroad man. One of the people he checked as a conductor told him, "You are a black Catholic." And my father said, "No, I'm not a black Catholic, I'm only a Catholic." But every Catholic, when they hated him, they told him he's black. That was the custom in Germany. It has nothing to do with a race. It has only to do with a religion. And then one day, another man said the same and hit my father in the face. And he was green and blue and black all over when he came home. But it was his job, his lifelong job. He couldn't quit.
Then my brother got caught reading a foreign paper, which was forbidden against the law. He was caught, and he got in jail for, I believe, how long?
2.5 years.
2.5 years for reading the paper. Well, this was the final straw on the camel's back. We decided to emigrate.
We were on the train to leave, and of course my mother was just devastated. She was crying terribly because she was leaving her whole family. And Nina was standing outside. They were waving, and everyone was crying. And I think I must have realized that we were leaving for a long time and that I wouldn't see Nina for a long time. And I remember when the train started, that first jerk, I let out this scream. I said, "Nina! Nina!" I will never forget that. Right before we were supposed to leave for America, I came down with either the chicken pox or the measles, I don't know which would have meant that we couldn't go. And it was so hard at that time already to get leave to go that they bundled me up real hard, measles and all, and put a veil or something over my face so that nobody could tell, and we went. We left anyway.
The Rhein family left Germany on a cold day in January 1937 aboard the USS Manhattan. Bound for New York, Edith remembers,
they had 2 swimming pools, one inside and one outside. And of course we did not stay outside. It was January, and I remember the crossing was just atrocious. My mother was sick from the minute she set foot in that ship until several days after we got off. She was deathly ill. It didn't bother me very much, and it didn't seem to bother Daddy or my grandparents. I think I remember when we saw the Statue of Liberty. I can just faintly remember everybody was crowding around the rails, and Daddy or someone held me up, and I could see it way far off in the distance, and everybody was talking about it. Of course, I didn't really know at the time what it was. When we arrived, we all had to go into this humongous, huge room. It was unbelievably big. No furniture except a few desks way up in the front with people sitting there. And thousands and thousands of people milling around. Everybody trying to hold on to the suitcase and to the children, and I can remember the noise. The noise level was just awful. But we got through that all right, measles and all. We were in this cab going somewhere, and we stopped for a traffic light or something, and a black man stepped off the curb to walk in front of the cab. I will never forget this. And I was so excited. I said, "Ach, gucke mal, ein schwarzer Mann." And none of us had ever seen a Negro before.
We had affidavit from my uncle who lived in Eudora, Arkansas. He managed a hotel, and he took out the papers, immigration papers, and on January the 17th, I believe, we arrived in New York and went by train to Eudora. In Eudora, we stayed about 3 months until I got a job in Little Rock. I got a job from a company who was known to us already in Germany. Namely, my uncle's wife was the sister of Mrs. Francis Silbernagel in Pine Bluff. And my mother had correspondence with him. And as it happened, the company intended to open a wine bottling work. And Mrs. Silbernagel promised me, when the plant will be open, I will have a job as manager of the department.
So then we moved to Barber Street, into one side of a duplex, and there was my mother and my dad and me and my grandmother and grandfather. After we moved from Barber Street, we moved to 605 East 6th, where my parents still live.
The house was $5,000, and we paid down $1,000. And every month we had to pay $45. But we rented out half of this house. It was a duplex. And we took in $25. So it was not so bad because we had only to pay $20.
First I went to Kramer School, and then I went to St. Edward's, and then I went to Mount St. Mary's. After I graduated from high school, I went to work, and at one time I thought about entering the convent, but I forgot about that when I met Willie Johnson.
We used to go with another couple swimming at Lake Nixon a lot. We would have fun playing King of the Hill on the spinning top at Lake Nixon. They had slides at Lake Nixon. Lake Nixon was a fun place for the summertime activities during the 50s.
And we had a beautiful wedding in St. Edward's Church, Catholic Church, and she was a beautiful bride.
Chuck was born in 1957, and oh God, were we happy. We thought we couldn't have children because we had been married over 6 years, and we were so thrilled, especially that it was a little boy. He was so adorable, and he's been a joy all my life. We lived at 2112 North Cleveland when we first got married. We bought the house 2 months before we got married, and we lived there 8 years. And then we bought the house at 6613 Waverly. And that's where we lived when Christy was born in 1963. And we were so thrilled that it was a little girl because now we had one of each. A few weeks after Christy was born, Willie told me that he thought we should get a divorce because he was involved with another woman. But we got through it, and now things are so wonderful. I just thank God every day.
Well, I remember at Christmas time when we went over to Nani Papa's, and they used to tell me they'd close the doors to the kitchen and the dining area and tell me that the little Santa Claus was coming, and the little elves were helping him get all the presents under the tree.
But when we used to tell her that the elves were decorating the tree and leaving the presents, she would just absolutely get terrified. So after about 3 years of this, she was probably about 4 or so, she thought she heard steps coming toward the kitchen, and I guess it was Mother, I don't know who, or Chuck. And she started screaming and ran into Mother and Daddy's bedroom, just petrified. And my daddy went in and got her and picked her up and held her and said, well, he would go in with her and there wasn't anything to be afraid of. And she wouldn't even look at the Christmas tree. She was so scared. She just held on to his neck and hid her face. It was just pitiful. So after that, we didn't pull that story anymore.
I remember a photographer along the walkway along Central Avenue in Hot Springs. He would take pictures of people walking up and down the sidewalk, and we had several pictures like that made. I remember several family trips. Specifically, Christy and Mom and myself went to Hot Springs and stayed at the Holiday Inn when you first came into Hot Springs. I remember going swimming there a lot, and Christy and I would always be out at the pool, swimming around like kids do. I remember Mom would always be out there sunbathing. She had some really weird glasses. I remember those really weird sunglasses she had.
Cactus Vic was a yearly visitor up until they got too big for him to come, and I think even we had him then a few times. He liked to pat the mother's knees too. But he did a wonderful trick with a magic wand that I still have a mental picture of Chuck, how he laughed every time Cactus Vic would make that wand just fall apart, and just it'd be straight up one minute and the next minute it'd be oh. And Christy had a surprise 15th birthday party that I don't think she will ever forget. It was absolutely wonderful, and it was a complete surprise to her. And we had a lot of her school friends, and they did a "This Is Your Life" sort of thing. and she was just totally surprised. That was a wonderful thing.
First time I met Christy's mother, I liked her a lot. Then when we got to know each other better and we did things together, I grew to love her.
In between this time is when I met Billy through Kevin Leonard, and I asked Kevin if he would help me move, and he said he didn't have time or something, and said, why don't you call Billy up? You know, he'll help you. Why don't you call Bill Ely? Why don't you call the Grizz up? So I was brave enough. I was brave enough to call him and ask him if he'd help me move, and he helped me move, and back home to Mom. And that night we went out to a concert, went to see Elixir at Rick's Armory, and that was our first date. And from then on we started dating and seeing each other every day, just about, bothering Mom. I remember coming home one time, I don't remember if it was that same night or not, or before then, and I told Mom that I had met the man that I was going to marry, and I was right.
Just think, a few years ago, I remodeled a ladies' bathroom. Little did I know that years later it would lead to matrimony. I've remodeled dozens of bathrooms, never one with the impact of this one. I asked her to dinner, we went. She asked me to go to the livestock show, we went. I asked her to marry me, she did.
If anyone had told me some time ago that I would be here this evening officiating at the wedding for Edith, I would have said it would be a cold day in and all of you saw the 5 inches of snow this morning.
My wedding I didn't enjoy as much as Christy's because I was scared. And the night we had the wedding rehearsal, I tried to talk Richard into just doing it right then and there, and I was just going to put a notice on the church door, the wedding has already been held, and just please go home. But being the sensible priest that he isn't, he refused to do that. And of course I'm glad he didn't, because it really was a nice wedding. And I'm so glad I found Al. He's been really great to me.
I remember one time I got him a gag gift of a can of worms or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, and he opened it up and it jumped out and it scared him.
My career has been mostly in the educational field, where I've been a school secretary for, I'm not going to mention how many years. I started out part-time at Holy Souls in 1964, I believe it was. And I worked there 5 years. And then I went to Fair Park School in the Little Rock School District. And I have been there for 18 long years at the same school, the same job. Things have certainly changed in those 18 years. But I will work until it's time to retire.
Oh, Chuck! What are you doing here? Honey, quit that!
I have met and, as Billy said, fell in love with the greatest family I've ever known. Baba and Mom, two people I never expected to meet, and believe it or not, they are now my mother and father-in-law.
My grandparents are probably the most two special people in the world. They are very loving and very giving people. I can't imagine anybody growing up without grandparents like them. I hope that my mother can be as special to my kids as my grandparents are to me.
I started working on this project in 1983 when I did a very small production that basically consisted of a music essay of my grandparents through the years. And at that point I really didn't know what else I would do, but I knew last year in 1985 that their 60th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I wanted to do something really special because those two people are so special to me. And so I started collecting all kinds of video and audio and went to record stores and did all kinds of research in libraries, went to University of Arkansas, found their house back in the records, the Historical Commission, interviewed a lot of people within the family and outside of the family to try to get some insight into exactly what these two people are all about. Other than loving them a lot, I guess that kind of gave me a little tint to my image of them. I wanted to know what they were like, how they were perceived by other people in the community, and I found out that everybody respects them greatly. And someone told me once that marriage is a 60-40 relationship. You give 60 and you get 40. And as long as both people obey that law, that their marriage will be about as perfect as could happen. And I believe that that is the situation with Nani and Papa.
What do I want my grandchildren to know about my parents? Well, I hope they'll know what wonderful people they were and the terrific influence that two people can be on others. They have influenced so many people, and their reputation is so wonderful that I hope they will realize that what you do, what you yourself do, influences other people that you're around. And if you have a good reputation, that means everything. I think my parents taught me that if they didn't teach me anything else. Always, always make sure you have a good name in the community. Be honest. They taught me to be honest, to be frugal, and to love God, even though they were both different religions.
In all, I think we were especially lucky. My family, we are very close. I love my family, and I am sure my family loves us. Amen.